My name is Clara Jennings, and the day my son got married was the same day I almost handed him the inheritance my late husband left me, $1.2 million, the sum of a lifetime's work, trust, and love. I thank God every day that I didn't. Because what I didn't know then was that my new daughter-in-law's secret could have destroyed everything my husband and I ever built. The wedding took place on a clear Saturday afternoon in early May, the kind of day where Indiana skies look endless and forgiving. I remember standing outside the small church on College Avenue, watching neighbors, relatives, and co-workers shuffle in, fanning themselves with programs that said, "Ethan and Laura, a new beginning." Everyone kept telling me how lucky I was, how radiant the bride looked, how polite her parents were, how proud Henry would have been. I smiled, but deep down, my stomach twisted like it did before every tax season back when I worked as a bookkeeper. It had been 2 years since Henry's heart attack. He'd left me our house, some savings, and that inheritance fund money he'd worked 40 years for at the limestone quarry and invested carefully. I hadn't touched it. I told myself it was Ethan's future, his chance to have a good start. I even planned to surprise him with it after the honeymoon, a symbolic blessing from his father. But at the reception, while laughter filled the tent and the band played "Can't Help Falling in Love," I noticed Laura's mother whispering something to her husband, her eyes darting toward me. He gave a small nod. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that says, "We've already counted the money." Later that evening, Laura came over, her makeup slightly smudged, her perfume too strong. "Mrs. Jennings," she said sweetly, "you raised such a wonderful man. We'll make you proud." I wanted to believe her. She was 28, smart, ambitious. She'd mentioned something about a marketing firm in Indianapolis. Ethan adored her. He looked at her the way Henry used to look at me in the early years, as if nothing else existed. Still, there were small things that didn't sit right. The way Laura's parents boasted about their country club connections, but hinted at recent financial adjustments. The way Laura kept asking Ethan if the house was fully paid off. The way Ethan, usually open with me, avoided my eyes when I asked about their honeymoon plans. A week after the wedding, I walked through our backyard garden alone, the one Henry built from scratch with railroad ties and peonies. The evening light fell soft on the grass, and for a brief moment, I felt peace. But when I looked through the kitchen window, I saw the envelope Henry had left me years ago, the one marked "Inheritance" for Clara's judgment. I hadn't opened it since his funeral. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I sat at the dining table, poured myself a small glass of wine, and opened it. Inside was a single handwritten note. Henry's penmanship was neat, the kind only men from his generation had. It said, "If you're reading this, you're thinking of giving it away. Remember, Clara, generosity without discernment becomes guilt in disguise. Give only when hearts are pure, not when hands are waiting." I folded the note and stared at it for a long time. Then I tucked it back into the envelope and placed it in my dresser. 2 weeks later, Ethan and Laura came over for Sunday lunch. I'd made pot roast and mashed potatoes, his favorite. After dessert, Laura steered the conversation toward housing prices, investment timing, and how young couples need a head start these days. She smiled and said, "Ethan mentioned your property's paid off. That's such a blessing." Ethan's fork froze midair. I answered calmly, "Yes." Henry made sure of that. She leaned forward, eyes bright, and said, "He must have left you well taken care of then. It wasn't a question." When they left, I sat at the table long after the dishes were done. Henry's words wouldn't leave my mind. Give only when hearts are pure. That night, I dreamt of Henry standing at the edge of our yard wearing his old work jacket, dirt on his hands, and that gentle half-smile. He looked at me and said, "You've always known when something isn't right, Clara. Don't start doubting now." The next morning, I called my friend Helen, who'd worked 30 years at the Monroe County Clerk's office. I told her I needed advice on document witnesses, a harmless pretext, but I just wanted to refresh myself on what kind of papers people bring to notaries these days. Helen laughed and said, "Still the same deeds, loans, and a lot of regret." I didn't know it then, but that little call would save everything I had. Because in less than a month, I'd find myself sitting in my living room across from Laura, the same sweet bride, as she laid out papers and said, "It's just a simple transfer, Mrs. Jennings." For safety. But that's ahead of the story. For now, I'll tell you this. On the day my son got married, I believed in happy endings. By the time the cake was cut, I learned that even love, especially love, needs proof. The next morning, I woke to the smell of damp soil and coffee, the kind of morning that reminded me of Henry, who used to say, "Every sunrise brings a chance to check your compass." I'd always thought he meant faith or marriage, but lately, I was learning it also meant money. Ethan called around 10, his voice a mix of cheer and nerves. Mom Laura and I were wondering if we could stop by later today. She wants to talk about, future stuff. Future stuff, I asked. "Yeah, just some financial planning," he said quickly. "Nothing serious." "Sure," I told him. "I'll make coffee." I spent the rest of the morning watering my peonies and wiping down the kitchen counters. It was a habit cleaning when I sensed trouble. When they arrived, Laura wore a fitted navy dress and that same perfume she'd worn at the wedding, sweet and sharp. Ethan looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. She placed her purse neatly on the table and smiled. "Mrs. Jennings, we're thinking of buying a house closer to the city. Something small. It'd be great for our careers and future kids." "That sounds nice," I said. She leaned forward. "Ethan mentioned your property's fully paid off." Henry was so wise. Did he invest too? Ethan stared at his hands. I could almost hear the tick of the kitchen clock. "He did," I said slowly. "We lived modestly, but he believed in saving." Laura's smile didn't waver. "That's such a blessing. Honestly, not many people our age have that kind of example." Then, with perfect timing, she added, "If we had some help up front, we could really build something strong, a legacy like Henry left you." That word legacy hit me like a warning bell. I changed the subject to dessert. We talked about weather gas prices and neighborhood gossip until the tension faded. But when they left, Ethan hugged me with one arm, his eyes distant. That night, I sat alone by the window, Henry's letter on my lap. The wind pushed through the screen gently, like an old friend whispering truth. I whispered back, "You were right, Henry. Hands are waiting." Days passed. Ethan called less. Laura texted occasionally, polite but distant. Then, one Thursday afternoon, she showed up unannounced, holding a cup of coffee from the downtown cafe. "Thought you might like this," she said cheerfully, stepping inside without waiting. She looked around the living room, her gaze lingering on the framed photo of Henry and me in front of our first car, a used Ford pickup. "Beautiful," she said. "You two really built everything together, didn't you?" "We did." She sat down, crossed her legs. "Ethan doesn't like asking for help, but I do. We're trying to put together a down payment before interest rates rise again. I know Henry left you something substantial, and I promise we'll pay it back." Her tone was soft rehearsed, the kind that convinces most people. But I'd spent 30 years balancing books and catching missing decimals. I knew when numbers or words didn't add up. I smiled gently. "I'll think about it." She seemed surprised. "Oh, sure. Of course. We just thought it might be simpler to do it soon. Ethan's already talked to a lender." After she left, I stared at the half-empty coffee cup on the table. I poured it down the sink. That evening, I took out Henry's box again, the wooden one, with his initials carved by hand. Inside were the usual keepsakes, his pocket watch, our wedding photo, and the old life insurance statement. But behind the papers was something else, a folded sheet marked Revised Will, 2018. I unfolded it carefully. There it was in his handwriting. To my wife Clara, for her judgment and discretion, the authority to pass this inheritance to our son only when she deems it earned, not entitled. Earned, not entitled. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Laura's calm smile and Ethan's tired face. The next morning, I called Helen again. Hypothetically, I said if someone wanted to move property ownership around, what would that require? Helen chuckled. Hypothetically, it happens all the time. Power of attorney notarized signatures may be a trust, all depends on who's convincing who. I didn't laugh. And if a person didn't understand what they were signing? Helen's tone shifted. Then it's fraud, Clara. Straight up. I thanked her and hung up. The phone felt heavy in my hand. The following weekend, Ethan stopped by alone. He looked pale, exhausted. Mom Laura's been under pressure, he said. Her dad's company hit some rough patches. They might lose their house. So she wants yours instead. His eyes widened. It's not like that. Ethan, I interrupted gently. Love doesn't ask you to trade your mother's roof for someone else's debt. He didn't answer. Just rubbed his forehead, muttered something about needing space, and left. That night, I drove to the grocery store just to clear my mind. But as I turned into the parking lot, I saw Laura standing near the copy shop next door, handing papers to a man in a blazer. He looked official. She spotted me and froze. I waved casually, pretending not to notice the envelope in her hand. When I got home, the porch light flickered in the wind, and I felt Henry's presence again, not haunting, just guiding. His voice in my head was calm as always. You've got good instincts, Clara. Don't ignore them now. I sat in the dark living room and whispered to myself I won't. A week later, I was in the grocery store when I saw Laura again, alone, standing by the floral aisle, looking at bouquets with a phone pressed to her ear. She didn't see me at first. Her tone was sharp, impatient. I told you I'll get the money. Just stop calling me. Then she caught sight of me, plastered on a smile, and said into the phone, I'll call you later, Mom, before hanging up. I pretended not to notice, but my chest tightened. When she approached, she was cheerful again, holding a bunch of daisies. Oh, Mrs. Jennings, how funny seeing you here. I live 5 blocks away, I said gently. Right, she laughed, tucking her hair behind her ear. Ethan and I were just talking about you. He said you've been working too hard around that big house. You shouldn't be alone so much. Her tone was friendly enough, but there was something about the way she said that big house that rubbed me wrong, like she'd already pictured herself there. We chatted briefly about the weather, but when I left, I couldn't shake the sound of her voice on that call. That night, Ethan came by unannounced. He looked uneasy, pacing the living room. Mom Laura told me she talked to you about the house thing. The house thing, I repeated. He rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, well, we're just thinking long term. You're alone and the place is too big. We could move in, help out, maybe take care of bills. Take care of bills, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Or take the house. He sighed. Mom, that's not fair. No, it's not, I said softly. That's exactly why it worries me. Ethan looked torn. Laura means well. She just wants to make sure you're not overworking yourself. Tell her I appreciate her concern, I replied, but Henry built this home with his hands, and I'm not leaving it because someone thinks it's too big. He stared at me for a long moment before nodding and leaving quietly. For 2 days, I didn't hear from either of them. I cleaned, gardened, and tried to clear my mind, but my gut kept tightening that old instinct that once helped me spot a fake invoice from miles away. Then Friday afternoon, Laura came again. This time she wasn't alone. A man in a gray suit followed behind her carrying a briefcase. "Mrs. Jennings," she said brightly. "This is Mr. Daniels, he's a notary. We just thought we'd stop by to help organize some estate planning things. You know, to make things easier down the road." Mr. Daniels smiled politely, but his eyes stayed on the papers in his hand. I invited them in calmly, as if nothing were wrong. Of course I said. "Why don't you sit down? Would you like some lemonade?" Laura shook her head. "Oh no, we won't take your time. It's just one simple form. It's for the deed, really, just to make sure everything's protected if God forbid something happens." Ethan wasn't there. That bothered me most. I took the stack of papers, flipping through them slowly. The print was dense legal language about ownership transfer, co-trusteeship, and joint property. "This says I'd be adding Ethan and Laura Jennings as joint owners," I said, reading aloud. Laura smiled sweetly. "Exactly, just a formality." "Then why didn't Ethan come?" She hesitated. "He's at work. He trusts me to handle details." I looked her in the eye. "I'll need to review these first." Her smile faltered. "Oh, of course. It's just the notary charges by the hour." "Then he's welcome to leave," I said, handing back the papers. There was a beat of silence. Mr. Daniels cleared his throat. "I'll step outside," he murmured, excusing himself. When we were alone, Laura's voice dropped. "You're making this harder than it has to be, Mrs. Jennings. Ethan's future is at stake." "Ethan's future," I repeated, "isn't yours to negotiate." She blinked, then forced another smile. "I'll tell him you said hi." After they left, I locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat at the dining table, heart pounding. I read every line on those forms again. One section in smaller print referenced pre-signed authorization for filing. I realized that if she'd managed to slip one signed page into the stack, she could have filed the deed transfer already. I grabbed my phone and called Helen. "Do you still have access to county records?" I asked. "Sure," she said, puzzled. "I need you to check something. Jennings Clara L. property at 114 Maple Drive. See if anyone submitted a new deed in the past week." Helen was quiet for a minute. Then she said, "Clara, there's a pending record. Not complete yet, but it lists Ethan and Laura Jennings as co-owners. Submitted by a Laura Thompson, that's her maiden name, right?" My stomach dropped. Helen sighed. "Clara, it looks like she filed a preliminary transfer form. It hasn't gone through yet, probably waiting for confirmation." "Don't let it go through," I said, voice shaking. "Don't worry," Helen replied firmly. "It's just pending, but you need to handle this smart, Clara." That night, I sat on my porch in the fading light holding Henry's letter again. I whispered, "You were right, old man. You were right about everything." Inside the kitchen, the clock ticked steady. Outside, fireflies blinked across the yard like small, patient witnesses. I poured myself tea, folded the papers neatly, and thought of Laura's face when I asked about Ethan. Something told me I hadn't seen the worst of her yet. The next morning, I called Ethan and asked if he could come by after work. My voice must have sounded sharper than usual because he didn't argue. When he arrived, he looked weary, shirt-wrinkled tie, loose eyes, red. I handed him a copy of the document Helen had sent me. He read silently for a minute, brow furrowed. Then he looked up confused. "Mom, what is this?" "That's what I'd like to know," I said. Helen checked county records. "There's a pending property transfer with your names on it, yours and Laura's, filed by Laura." His face went pale. "That can't be right." "It's in black and white, Ethan." He shook his head slowly, muttering, "She told me it was just a pre-approval form. She said it was about refinancing her parents' loan. She lied." He set the paper down, staring at the table like it might explain itself. "Mom, please. Don't make this a bigger deal than it is." Laura's just trying to help. She's been under pressure. I interrupted, trying to keep calm. Ethan, pressure doesn't justify forgery. He looked up, startled by my tone. I softened. You're my son. I'm not here to ruin your marriage. But you need to see things clearly before she drags you into something you can't fix. He rubbed his temples. I'll talk to her. Do more than talk, I said. Check your name on everything you sign. He left quietly, and I watched from the window as his car disappeared down Maple Drive. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I brewed coffee, sat at Henry's old desk, and wrote everything down, dates, names, what Helen said. It wasn't about revenge. It was about proof. That night the phone rang. It was Helen again. Clara, you'll want to hear this. The submission was retracted an hour ago. No signature, no filing. It's dead in the water. Relief washed over me, but only for a moment. If Laura was bold enough to try once, she'd try again. And she did. The next Sunday, Laura showed up with a bright smile and a store-bought pie. She acted as though nothing had happened. Ethan told me you were worried, she said. I'm sorry for any misunderstanding. It's just that with everything going on, we're trying to be proactive about family matters. Family matters, I repeated. She nodded, crossing her legs. Estate planning, asset protection. You know how unpredictable life can be. I met her gaze. I do. That's why I always read before I sign. Her smile flickered, but she recovered quickly. Of course. I'd never ask you to do anything you're uncomfortable with. She stood, straightened her skirt, and added, We just want you to feel secure and included. When she left, I realized she'd said secure and included, the same way someone says trapped and signed. That evening, I walked through the house, touching the things Henry had built: the bookshelf, the porch, railing the window frame in Ethan's old room. Every nail carried a memory. I whispered, You'd be disappointed in her, Henry, but maybe more disappointed in me for not seeing it sooner. Monday morning, I called Pastor Allen, an old friend from church who'd known Henry well. He listened quietly as I told him everything. Then he said, Clara, forgiveness doesn't mean foolishness. Protect what Henry left you. God expects stewardship, not surrender. That line stuck with me. Stewardship, not surrender. By Wednesday, Ethan came by again. His voice was low, defeated. Laura found out you called the county. She's furious. I'm not sorry, I said. She says you don't trust her. I don't, I admitted. But that doesn't mean I don't care. Ethan, listen. Marriage doesn't mean giving up your judgment. Your father used to say, a man who signs without reading isn't a husband, he's a hostage. Ethan half smiled, but his eyes stayed sad. Mom, I don't know what to do. She's my wife. Then start by being honest with her. Tell her I'm not senile and I know what she tried to do. He nodded weakly, then left. That evening, I heard the hum of a car outside. It wasn't Ethan's. I looked through the blinds and saw Laura's sedan parked in the driveway. The engine was still running. She didn't come in. She just sat there for a long time, staring at the porch light. Then she drove off. 2 days later, an envelope came in the mail. No return address. Inside was a typed note. You shouldn't have interfered. Some things are better left alone. There was no signature, but the handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, the same loopy J Laura used on her wedding invitations. My heart raced, but I wasn't scared, just angry. Angry at what greed could turn a young woman into. That night, I went to Helen's again. We sat in her kitchen drinking decaf coffee, the clock ticking loud. She's scared now, Helen said. You cornered her without saying a word. That's why she's lashing out. What should I do? Helen leaned back. Do nothing. Let her show her own hand. I nodded. And that's exactly what I plan to do. 3 days later, Ethan called in tears. Mom, she left. She packed her bags and went to her parents' place. She said you'd poisoned me against her. My first instinct was to comfort him, but I stayed quiet. Then I said softly, maybe this is her way of showing you what loyalty means and doesn't mean. He cried quietly on the phone. When we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table looking at Henry's note under the lamplight. Give only when hearts are pure. It was no longer advice, it was a verdict. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the streetlights flicker on. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the low hum of crickets. Henry used to love this hour, when the air was thick but calm, the day finally exhaling. I whispered into the dark. You were right, Henry. About people. About patience. A week had passed since Ethan told me Laura had left. He came by every evening after work just to talk. I could tell the silence of the house haunted him. Sometimes he'd start a sentence about her, then stop halfway unsure if he wanted to defend her or himself. One evening, he arrived holding a box of old photographs. I thought maybe you'd want to go through these with me, he said softly. Inside were wedding photos, pictures of Henry fixing the fence. Ethan's graduation, our first Christmas in the house. As we sorted them, I said, your father was proud of you, Ethan. He wanted you to stand on your own 2 feet. He never wanted this inheritance to make you smaller. Ethan looked up, tears shining in his eyes. I know, Mom. I think I just wanted to make everyone happy, Laura, you, him. But I ended up losing myself somewhere in between. I reached over and touched his hand. You didn't lose yourself. You just forgot who you were raised to be. That's what greed does, son. It changes the air around good people until they stop breathing right. We stayed there, flipping through the photos until dusk melted into night. The next morning, I drove to the bank. For months, the inheritance account had sat untouched under Henry's name, with me listed as trustee. I didn't plan to withdraw a cent, but I wanted to make sure no one else could either. The teller, a kind woman who knew me for years, smiled and said, Don't worry, Mrs. Jennings. Everything's locked down tight. As I walked out, I noticed a familiar figure across the street. Laura standing by a cafe window holding a folder. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses. She looked thinner, smaller somehow. Our eyes met through the glass. She froze. I gave a small nod, not of anger, just acknowledgement, and kept walking. 2 days later, a letter arrived. The handwriting was neat and careful, but shaky. Mrs. Jennings, I don't expect you to forgive me. I know what I did was wrong. My parents' debts were worse than I let on. I thought if I could fix everything fast enough, Ethan would never find out. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I'm getting help now. Real help. I hope someday you'll see that I wasn't just greedy. I was scared. Laura. I read it twice, then tucked it inside Henry's wooden box, the one now labeled in my handwriting, Forgiveness. When Ethan came by that night, I showed him the letter. He read it silently, then folded it carefully. She's trying, Mom, he said quietly. I know, I replied, and I hope she keeps trying, but trust that's earned one honest day at a time. We talked for hours that night. About mistakes, about second chances, about how Henry would have handled things. Ethan decided he'd move into a small rental downtown. He wanted to start over, build something that was his. I'll help, I said, but not with money. With sense. He laughed, and for the first time in weeks it sounded real. Over the next few months, life found a rhythm again. Ethan worked longer hours, saved every paycheck. I saw him rebuild piece by piece the way Henry rebuilt the old shed after a storm-patient, deliberate steady. Then one Sunday morning, as I sat drinking coffee on the porch, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Ethan, holding a small set of keys. "I closed on the house, Mom," he said, smiling. "It's not big, but it's mine." I stood and hugged him tight. "That's all your father and I ever wanted, for you to have something that's truly yours." That evening, I drove by his new house. It was a modest single-story place with a porch light already glowing. The lawn was rough, but there was a maple tree out front just beginning to turn red. I parked for a moment, watching him carry boxes inside, and felt peace settle over me. Later that night, I took Henry's note out once more. The paper was yellowing at the edges, the ink fading but still strong. I read it aloud one last time. "Give only when hearts are pure." I smiled and said I finally understand. Spring came early that year, and with it a kind of calm I hadn't felt in months. The air in Bloomington smelled of rain and lilacs again. The peonies in the yard, the ones Henry planted the year before he died, bloomed thick and full, just like they used to when Ethan was a boy chasing fireflies barefoot in the dark. Ethan had moved into his new house 2 months earlier. He called it small but solid. Every Saturday, he'd drive over to check on me, bringing groceries or fixing a loose shutter. Sometimes we'd eat together on the porch, and I'd catch glimpses of the little boy I used to know, the one who used to build forts in the living room and fall asleep under a blanket of comic books. One evening, he mentioned Laura again. His voice was soft, uncertain. "She's been trying to reach me. Sent another letter." I nodded. "What did she say?" "She's working at her aunt's flower shop in Indianapolis. She says she's paying off her parents' debt one check at a time. She wants to apologize to both of us in person." I looked out toward the horizon. The sky was streaked with gold. If she's sincere, then meeting her might help you both find peace. He hesitated. "Would you come if she did?" "I might," I said. "But not as a judge. Just as someone who's seen what fear can turn into when it's left alone." A week later, Laura drove into town. I watched from the kitchen window as her car pulled into the driveway. She looked different, thinner, older, humble, in a way she hadn't been before. She carried a bouquet of tulips in trembling hands. "Mrs. Jennings," she said softly, "I came to say thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For not ruining my life when you could have." I studied her for a moment. She was shaking slightly, eyes wet. Ethan stood beside her, torn between hope and caution. "Laura," I said gently, "when someone forges a name, they lose more than trust. They lose their own." "I know," she whispered. "I've been trying to earn it back." I motioned for her to sit. We had coffee in silence for a while before she said, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm different now. I've been in therapy. I finally understand what drove me to do those things. I was raised to believe love came with a price tag." I nodded slowly. "Then I hope you've learned that the only love worth keeping is the kind that doesn't need receipts." She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "I have." Ethan reached over and took her hand. It was the first time I'd seen him do that without guilt in months. They stayed for an hour. When they left, Laura placed the tulips on my kitchen table. As I watched their car disappear down the road, I felt no bitterness, only relief. That night, I placed the tulips in a vase beside Henry's photograph. "You'd have liked that girl," I whispered. "She made a mess, but she learned to clean it up." The days that followed were peaceful. I spent more time volunteering at church, helping with the food drives, and mentoring young widows about budgeting and estate planning. Every time I spoke to them about financial wisdom, I thought of Henry's letter and smiled. One Sunday, Pastor Allen invited me to share my lesson with the congregation during women's group. I stood in the fellowship hall, the smell of coffee and baked goods filling the air, and said, "God gives us blessings, not to hand them out blindly, but to guard them with care and use them when the heart tells us it's right. Generosity is holy, but discernment keeps it pure. Heads nodded and a few women wiped their eyes. Afterward, a woman about my age came up and said, "I gave my son everything after my husband died. He lost it all in a year. I thought I was being loving. Now I just feel foolish." I took her hands. "You weren't foolish," I said gently. "You were kind. You just gave before they were ready to receive." That night, I sat on the porch with the letter Laura had sent me earlier. She'd written again to say she was starting college classes online, business management. "I want to build something the right way." This time she wrote, "Thank you for teaching me that trust isn't money, it's time and truth." I folded it carefully and placed it in the same box where Henry's note rested. That box had once held deeds, wills, and legal papers. Now it held something far more valuable: lessons. A few days later, Ethan came by after work. "Mom," he said, grinning, "I asked Laura to dinner this weekend. Just dinner. No promises, no pressure." "That sounds fair," I said with a smile. "Maybe second chances don't always need contracts either." We laughed. The air felt light again. When he left, I walked through the house, turning off lights one by one. I paused by the mantel where our family photo still stood. Henry with his arm around me. Ethan in front of us, barely 12. I touched the frame and whispered, "We did all right, didn't we?" Outside, the wind rustled the trees, soft and kind, like an answer I could almost hear. A year later, on the anniversary of Henry's passing, Ethan drove me to the cemetery just outside Bloomington. The spring air was gentle, filled with the faint hum of bees and the smell of cut grass. I carried the same flowers I brought every year, white lilies, Henry's favorite. We stood quietly at his grave. The marble had weathered a little, the engraved words softened by rain. Beloved husband, father, and friend. Builder of homes and hearts. I traced the letters with my fingertips, the stone cool beneath my skin. Ethan placed his hand on my shoulder. "Mom," he said softly, "I don't think I've ever thanked you properly." "For what?" "For saving me. From myself, mostly." I smiled faintly. "You were worth saving." He looked down. "You know, I used to think money was proof that Dad loved us, his way of leaving something behind. But I get it now. What he really left was you. Your patience. Your sense." I felt tears prick my eyes. Henry always said wisdom was the only inheritance that grows when you share it. Ethan smiled. He was right. We stood there in silence, the breeze rustling through the trees. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower droned faintly, a reminder that life always goes on. After a while, Ethan turned to me. "I've been seeing Laura again," he said cautiously. "We've been taking it slow. Real slow." I nodded, unsurprised. "How's she doing?" "Better," he said. "She's working full-time at the flower shop now, taking night classes. She told me to tell you thank you for not hating her." I let out a small laugh. "Hatred's heavy, Ethan. I learned that the hard way. Carry it long enough and you forget how to walk forward." He smiled, then asked, "Would it be all right if she came with us next year? I took a deep breath, watching the clouds drift across the open sky. "If she's earned her peace, then yes," I said. "Your father believed in redemption. So do I." As we left, I looked back at the headstone one last time. The sun caught the edge of the marble, and for a fleeting second, I could almost see Henry's reflection there, steady, proud, still watching over us. That afternoon, we stopped by Ethan's house. It was small but tidy, with new shutters and a patch of grass he'd managed to coax into something green. Laura had sent over a bouquet, simple daisies tied with a ribbon that read, "Thank you." Inside, Ethan made us tea. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking about that inheritance." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh." He laughed. "Don't worry, I'm not asking for it. I just think maybe someday, when the time's right, we could set up a scholarship for kids who work hard but can't afford college, in Dad's name." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I nodded slowly. That, I said, would be the perfect use of it. Later that night, after he dropped me home, I sat by the window with the lights off, watching the moon rise over Maple Drive. The quiet felt different now, not lonely, just full. I thought of Henry's letter, the one that had guided every decision since that day. I opened the box and read it one last time. "Give only when hearts are pure, not when hands are waiting." This time, though, I understood something deeper. Henry hadn't just been talking about money. He meant love, trust, forgiveness. I wrote a small note of my own and slipped it into the box beside his. It said, "You were right, Henry. The real inheritance isn't what we give, it's what we learn before we do." I sealed the box, placed it on the shelf, and turned off the lamp. The air was still the kind of stillness that doesn't ache anymore. Before heading to bed, I paused at the door, looking out at the dark yard, lit faintly by the porch light. Fireflies blinked near the peonies, just like they did when Ethan was a child. And for the first time in a long while, I felt that everything, every mistake, every loss, every small act of mercy had led exactly here. In my final narration, I spoke softly, like telling an old friend a truth I'd just learned. When my son got married, I almost gave away the inheritance my husband left behind. I thought I was giving love. What I didn't realize was that love isn't measured in what we give, but in what we protect. That inheritance wasn't meant for Ethan's wallet, it was meant for his heart, and maybe for mine too. I paused, breathing in the quiet of the night. If you're listening and someone's asking you for something you're not ready to give, remember, this waiting doesn't make you selfish. Sometimes waiting is how we keep love alive. Sometimes it's how we save everything. Then, with a smile in my voice, I finished the way Henry always ended his letters to me. Take care of your heart, and it will take care of your home.